Today's sermon's taken from Daniel 1. If you go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Daniel 1, we'll go ahead and read. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, king of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them in the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid my lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink, why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found that none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters of his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. This is God's word. Again, I want to thank you all for coming out today. I really appreciated the songs that we sang, that John and Cindy picked out for singing today, because if you notice our God, how much that mirrored the fighter verse that we had, that God is sovereign, our God, there's no one like you, there was none like us. And I just appreciate the effort that goes into that. Let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for just how you watch over us, and be with us today, Lord, as we go over your word. And I pray, Lord, that we just focus on you, and that the glory goes to you, and that just help us to just hunger after you each day, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. As I was a boy, I would go to Sunday school, and I don't know about you, as you go to Sunday school, you hear all the Bible stories, and you hear the things in the Bible from Adam and Eve and on. And there comes a point, you take your parents' word for it, that this is true, that this is whatever my parents say is true, and you take that for face value. And as you get older, you start to question a little bit. You start to say, well, how do I know that that's true? How do I know that this is real? How do I know that this Bible is real? And as I taught Sunday school, I always taught the kids, that's why I appreciated the prophetic verses in like Ezekiel and Isaiah, because it points to the cross. It points to things that happen. It points to Christ. When Isaiah's, talking about the lamb to be slain, it's Christ, and it gives us encouragement that there's physical evidence. I mean, there's so much. But this book here is one of those books that you can use as a pinhole to point that the Bible is true, and we know that it can be true. Later in Daniel, in some of the prophetic verses, scholars looked and they almost said that it was written before or after the fact happened because it was so close to the time. If you look in some of the commentary, it points to some of the time of Alexander the Great and Mark Antony and the Roman times, and that's something that you can flesh out and you can see as real. And so it's just this is a book that can be encouraging, that we know the Bible is true, and that's one thing that I appreciate about studying that. When we look at again, as a kid, anyone that's read the Old Testament, you see that there were times when the Israelites followed after God, and then there were times when they fell away. And it seems like as you read the Old Testament, you almost get into kind of somewhat of a frustration when you think, why wouldn't you just go after God? Why wouldn't you just continually follow God? But they perpetually would fall away, even after seeing their predecessors, the trouble that they had, they would still fall away. Well, this was one of the times that they fell away, and we won't get into it, but some of the different times that we saw when they fell away was, think about when Moses went up on Mount Sinai and Aaron was down below. What was the first thing that the Israelites did? They said, "What have you done to us? You brought us out." And what did Aaron do? He took off their rings, melted them down, made a calf for them to worship. And you're just like, ugh, and then that had to be dealt with. Or you think about when, you might remember when King Ahab and Jezebel, they killed all the priests, and she was ready to kill, they hated Elijah, and they were ready to kill Elijah, and Elijah came, and God showed himself. He burned up the sacrifice, and you just think, why would Israel continually fall away and come back? But this is one of those times, and we're going to look at that. And in Jeremiah 25, 1 through 4, it shows why the King Jehoiakim was given into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. We won't go look at that today, but I encourage you this afternoon, take a look back and see why. There was a purpose why. It wasn't that it just happened. God delivered King Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hands. Today we're going to look at Daniel 1 with the intent of answering one important question, and that's, what does God expect from his people when they're living in difficult times? Which, we've lived in many difficult times, and now is one of them. And on the way, we'll examine how Daniel and his three friends came to where they were. How did they get there? What their circumstances were and what their reaction was. In the beginning there, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar carried off articles from when ancient kings would conquer. They would take all the plunder, and it would be physical things, but it would also be slaves. They would take individuals as plunder as well. And Nebuchadnezzar carried off a large contingent of the Israelites into captivity, which included the royal family. And this would have been the choice family. I mean, this would have been the choice, smart people with no defect, no one with any blemish whatsoever, be it physical or mental. And the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the court, to select out some of the royal family, some of the best that he wanted serving him. And it says 4 youths. So you think, it doesn't give us the exact age, but it probably would have been, in their late teens to early 20s. So you think about, as I read these stories, I always like to put myself, in the position of that. What would my mindset have been at that time? And it would have been, I don't know as much as I do now, and it would have been, not well-seasoned youths at that time. And they found themselves in this situation, not as a result from their doing. not as a result of their doing. A lot of times if you see someone get in trouble, you go, well, look at, they put themselves, it's from their own actions. Look at the poor decisions they made. They're in there because of poor decisions they made. Obviously, Daniel and his friends weren't in that position. They were taken captive, and it wasn't anything of their own doing. And as you think about that, Daniel, he must have been thinking about, if you remember back to Joseph, if you'll take and turn back to Genesis 45. A lot of times we think, why me? What is this? What is this? Why did this happen to me? And this was Joseph's reaction. Just for context, Joseph had been taken captive. I'm sure all of you know the story, but he'd been taken captive, put into the service of the Pharaoh, gone into captivity, or he had been put in prison again after being falsely accused of something he didn't do. Remembered a dream, was brought back into the king's service, and then he interpreted the dream, which was to save Egypt in the area from the famine. And Joseph realized this for what it was. And this is what Joseph, when he confronted his brothers, when his brothers realized who it was, they were in fear. They were in fear for their lives, because they're like, all of a sudden now, this person that we sent away to die is now in charge of us. But this was Joseph's reaction to them. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Everyone leave my presence." So there's no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. They were petrified that he was going to kill him. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one who you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of the entire household, and ruler of Egypt." Joseph realized why he was in the position he was. He realized that God had sent him there. It wasn't just some poor decisions, and it wasn't just arbitrary that he was sent there. And no doubt Daniel was realizing the same thing. He was being sent there for a purpose. There was a reason why he was sent there. And it wasn't just to schlup things for the king Nebuchadnezzar. He was there for the purpose of God. Now, when we think about prisoners, they wouldn't have been prisoners in the classical sense. We think a lot of times when you hear prisoners, you think, you're in chains and you're, sent off into the dungeon or such. This wasn't what it was. This was more or less, if you think of indentured servants, they were prisoners, but the king invested time and money into them. There were certainly restrictions. They couldn't do whatever they wanted to do, but they had responsibilities, and they sent them off to learn. If you think about when the Babylonians took them, a little side note, they selected the youth. They said, pick out the youth, and you think, why did they do that? What was the purpose of selecting the youth? And you think about it, you don't try breaking a horse, when it's 5 years old. You pick it when it's younger, and you mold it, and you start to get it when it's young, because they're much more pliable. So the Babylonians, and I don't know about you, but for me to try and learn something brand new now is much more difficult than when I was younger, because it's just, for some reason, a lot of times it's easier to learn when you're younger. You still can when you're older, but a lot of times it's tougher. But by and large, it's your attitudes aren't fully formed, so you're easier to teach. So they taught the Israelites in their history and their language. And why did they do that? They wanted to fully conform them. They wanted to just put away any part of their Israelite heritage that they would have had. And they wanted them to fully conform them into their culture. You think about, when you take them as prisoners and servants, I don't want you to have any allegiance to anyone but me. So I'm going to fully immerse you into my society and my culture. And by and large, I'm going to turn you into a Babylonian. So they taught them the new language and the new new literature to them. And you think about that, I mean, how difficult that would have been, because it's not just, you're learning a whole new, it's like us trying to learn Russian. You know, I mean, if you look at the Russian alphabet, their letters aren't the same as ours, so it would have been the same for the Israelite Jews, that it would have been a whole different language. They also changed their names, and you think about how much of a disconcerting that would be. You know, I don't know about you, but a lot of times you hear a name and you try and pinpoint nationality. You know, I think Tykro, that's maybe German. I think of Soderstrom, that's Norwegian. No, Swedish. But you think about all the different names, and you try and pinpoint what, you know, what are they? What is their nationality? And you think about what, how much we associate with their name. It was on years ago, but some of you might remember the name Roots. Remember the movie Roots? I don't know how you pronounce that, Roots, whatever. But one of the scenes was, it was I can't remember who wrote the movie. Was it, I'm thinking Hal, what was it? Yeah, I was thinking Hal Lindsey, but I think that he wrote the late great Planet Earth. Anyway, there's a scene in Roots where they took one of the main character, Kunta Kinte, and they're breaking him down. And one of the things they do is, I believe they named him Toby. His name was Toby. And he refused to say, my name is Toby. And one of the famous scenes is them beating him down to force him to change his name. And what would that have been? It would have been to cut ties from his old self. And that's what the Babylonians were doing to them. It's like, you're no longer, you're going to believe in our gods. You're going to believe in what we believe, and no longer us, no longer what you did. Some of you might remember, does anyone remember the name Cassius Clay? Who is Cassius Clay? Muhammad Ali. Cassius Clay was a young boy, and I mean, I know it's a barbaric sport, but I still watched it as a kid, watching the boxing. Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay at the time, he was a boy that, if history doesn't fail me, he had his bike stolen. And one of the trainers said, well, why don't you learn, you know, he was going to go out and do something bad to get it back. And this trainer said, why don't you learn to box, and then you can protect yourself and take care of yourself. Well, Muhammad Ali did that. He went in and he trained and he fought. And he went on and he went to the Olympics, and he medaled in the Olympics. And he went on and he was one of the greatest boxers, you know, yet to this day, I mean, as far as records wise. And you look at, if you saw Muhammad Ali box, I mean, it was just fluid motion going throughout the ring. And he went by the name Cassius Clay. Well, then he became involved with, I believe it was Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam. And he decided that Cassius Clay was a slave name, that I'm a person of color, I'm black, I'm not going to be called Cassius Clay because that's a slave name. So he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And you look at, that was a pretty controversial thing, because I mean, there was real antagonism. I mean, he did other things too, that, like he refused to go to join the military and things like that. But that was one of the big things, that I'm changing my name to Muhammad Ali. And there's quite an uproar about that, you know, I'm not going to recognize, you know, who are you to say you're Muhammad Ali and things like that. Well, he went on he continued boxing under the name Muhammad Ali. Well, there was one of the fighters by the name of Ernie Terrell said, he refused to, all the pre-interviews said, your name is Cassius Clay, I'm not calling you Muhammad Ali, I refuse to acknowledge you by that name. This infuriated Muhammad Ali, that you refuse to call me my name, you know, that I've taken because of my religion. But he refused, and he refused right up to the fight. And I don't know if any of you have seen footage or might have seen the fight, but if you remember during the fight, Muhammad Ali was clearly outmatched Ernie Terrell by far. And he would beat him up to a point, and then he would step back. And he could have easily knocked him out and been done with the fight, but he didn't. He would go up close, beat him down, and step back. And what was a thing that he kept saying the whole time in the bout? What's my name? What's my name? And he kept saying that. And it was just, that was controversial. He finally had to apologize after the bout. Later on, he apologized for doing that, but it was just a vindictive thing. He said, what's my name? That meant something to him. I believe misguided that his, that he joined the Nation of Islam, but his name meant something to him. And as I was preparing this, I think Cat Stevens changed his name too, but I don't think Cat Stevens was his original name either. But you think how much more, how much Muhammad Ali's name means to him. How much does your name mean to you? My name is Al Kreider. My parents didn't just go in the dictionary and grab a name. I mean, that meant something. I mean, they picked those names, and I'm sure each of your parents thought for a while on each of your names. And for these, their names meant even more. In ancient times, names meant even more. We won't go to all these passages, but think about in Jacob and Esau, in Genesis 24 and 26. They were named for that reason, because of their birth order. And in Samuel, Hannah, when she says, give Samuel his name, it's for a reason. It's because. And one of the most important names of all, Emmanuel, God is with us, or Jesus. Think of that, the name Emmanuel. I mean, God is with us. That name means something. And also, names were changed to recognize change. We think about, Jacob having his name to Israel. That after fighting the angel, and the angel touched his hip and he said, your name will now be Israel. Or Abraham, or Abram. Your name is now Abraham because you're the father of nations. These four youths, their names meant something to them. And I mean, think about, their names would have been just dear to them. Their names, Daniel, his name meant my God is judge. Hananiah meant Yahweh is showing grace. And Mishael, who is what God is. And Azariah, Yahweh is helped. All four of these, their names were changed to Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, respectively. These names would have had great meaning to them. That would have been near and dear to them, something that their parents would have had them. And you look at all of these things, the re-education, the learning of the language, and the name change were meant to force them to abandon their faith. It was all meant to do away with who they were and what they believed in. We can no longer have you connected to that. But there was one thing that it was to fully conform them to the Babylonian culture, and that would have meant also the food. And that was the one thing Daniel would not eat is the king's food. And the reason for this was probably it had some idol connection. The food was probably connected to idol worship in some way. As we go through this story, you can see how the tension is just building. It's just, I don't know if you've been in situations where you can feel the tension is building and building, and you feel that something's going to break and someone's going to say something, and something's going to be said. And these four youths had to know that time was coming, because you're conforming me and conforming me, and there's coming a point where I can't conform any longer. I can't do that any longer. Well, the one thing that they couldn't do, or that Daniel couldn't do, was to eat the king's food. And in verse 8 it says, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Think of that. He resolved himself. This wasn't just a snap decision. So many times when we go through life, and I included, I'll say, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'll deal with that when it comes. And there's some value to that point, but there also comes a point where we have to say, at this point, I will not cross, and I'm going to make that stand today. Not when that decision comes, but that's where I stand today. And Daniel did that. He had decided long before that I will not eat the king's food. This is one thing to do that. He asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself. And if you notice, as Daniel wrote this, it's not Daniel's cleverness. It's not his rapport. It's not that Daniel was just a nice guy that the chief official had favor. It was that God caused the official to have favor on Daniel and his friends. It wasn't something that Daniel realized, that it wasn't anything about him, but it was purely the fact that God had caused him to have favor on them. Now, if you look at they asked to be only eat vegetables. And if you look at, when I was a kid, one of the big things that was encouraged to eat, which I hated, was you were encouraged to eat liver. You know, we're serving liver and onions. And I'm like, I don't know what the onions kind of dressed it up, but why did they serve onions? One of the reasons was you got iron from the liver. And one of the human body is not meant to be a herbivore. You look at like a cow and like deer and things like that, they eat just purely green, grass and things like that, and their body's able to process that. We're not able to do that. We need some form of protein or iron. And if you look at, if you've ever seen someone that's anemic, I mean, their face looks sallow and just kind of pale, and it's a noticeable thing. If you're not getting the right nutrition, your body shows it from the outside. I mean, your skin shows that. The court official would have known this. He would have known that if they're not eating the proper nutrition, and obviously they didn't have vitamins or anything like that back then, so they needed to get all their nutrition from what they ate. And so if they weren't eating the right nutrition, which would have included meat and those things, their bodies would have started to show it. I mean, if they would have only eaten vegetables and that, their bodies would have shown that, and he knew that. And he was scared, and rightfully so, because that would have been noticed not only to him, but the king. The king would have noticed their different nutrition. But again, through God's favor, he allowed these four men to go through that test. Test is for 10 days. They not only stayed the same, but their nutrition, their appearance got better. They looked better than what they would have. We need to look at how through God's grace he brought these four young men into slavery. This wasn't just some chance. This wasn't just some accident that they were brought into slavery. He put them into slavery. He then allowed them to be tested until a choice needed to be made. It was God that put this test to them. And it was God who gave Daniel the courage. Think about so many times people nowadays, you might hear the phrase, go along to get along. I'll do whatever it takes just to slide into the woodwork. I'll do whatever it takes just to slide onto the radar. God gave Daniel the courage not to do that. Don't just sit where you're at. Don't just fly under the radar. Stand up for what you believe, and he gave them the courage to say, no, I can't eat this, and test me. I'll give you the test. You test me. And he prepared, we won't obviously go into it today, but God's preparing the three other youths for their test. When you think about the fiery furnace, he's giving them a taste of what God can do. And Daniel's showing them courage that they're going to need to show in the very near future. And he showed them, through his grace, he showed them a miracle that no one could deny. The chief official knew this. He knew what they were eating. He knew what their nutrition was. And he saw that they got better than what they would have been. There was no mistake. There was no, a lot of times with miracles, people like to qualify them. Well, it's not really a miracle because, or they find some other reason. There was no denying that this was a miracle. God made their appearance look better, even though they were eating a different food. We think about, this wasn't the only miracle in this passage. In this passage, this isn't the only miracle. It says God gave them understanding of the Babylonian literature and language. Again, that would be so difficult to get a mastery of that. And he gave Daniel, if you notice later, in dreams and visions, he gave Daniel that ability. He set them set them apart long before Nebuchadnezzar ever conquered Judah. Obviously, God, as we look at today's verse, the fighter verse, God is sovereign over all. God knows what is happening. God knows us before we were born. This was no surprise to God whatsoever that Nebuchadnezzar, he put Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, and he's the one who put these boys in the position of being tested and having to eat the different food. And as we he used these four boys to show that he alone is God. And as we look further into Daniel at a later time, you'll look how he used Daniel and these three boys, to show mercy on the various rulers. Look at all the different things, how the three youths were involved with, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Darius. And look at the mercy that he showed to those other rulers through these young men. After we've examined this text and noted certain truths, we're ready to answer the question, what does God expect from his people when they're living in difficult times? And the answer is that at all times, God expects his people to be faithful and reliable or loyal to God and obedient without question, which brings a blessing of God, which is not necessarily material. If we look at again, verses 8 and 9, again, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food, and God caused official to show favor. It wasn't necessarily material. As we look closely, we must go through death with this. How are we supposed to be faithful when times are difficult? How can you and I be faithful when times are difficult? And if you're looking to your own ability, you won't find it there. The only way we can be faithful is when we put our trust in Christ, and when we put our trust in Jesus Christ, who is faithful and true. In Revelation 19, 11, and 16, it says, "Then I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war." In verse 16, 19:16, "On his robe and on his thigh he has the name written, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords." And in the supreme sense, we serve the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Think of that phrase. There are no other kings above Christ. Christ is the only, and the Lord of Lords. There is none other, and we need to realize that. Further, authentic trust in Christ will produce the fruit talked about in Galatians 5:22. But the fruit of Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Again, note the word faithfulness. God is faithful. And here's our assignment for the days ahead. Pray for each other that God, by the power of the Spirit of Christ, will make us faithful people who will not flinch in this age of uncertainty and outright evil. Pray that we'll obey Christ and serve him without hesitation, even if the culture turns radically against our way of living and thinking. So as we come to the close, think about, we're not, other people have walked before us in tough times. And what was Daniel's reaction to being put in this tough situation? He put his faith in Christ. And as we get further into Daniel, you'll see it doesn't waver from that. God, through his sovereign grace, allowed them to be tested. This was a serious test, but it was relatively small to the ones that were coming. And God was faithful, and through his grace, he gave Daniel the courage to stand up for that. And he gave Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah an example to follow. Look, this is what God, I'm looking to Daniel and the courage that he has. And I'm going to emulate that. And what a God I serve, that my condition got better than what it was. It didn't stay the same, it got better. And God was preparing them for much more severe tests to come. And as I look at, we face tests each day. You and I face tests each day. And we need to resolve ourselves and decide, this is what I stand for. This is what I believe, and I will not waver. I will not go along to get along. On this I stand. And the fact is that Jesus Christ is my Savior. There is no other God, and there's no other way for me to heaven. There is no other way that I can accept. There is no other way that I can allow someone to believe that they're going to get to heaven on their good works, merits, or some other faith. There is no other but Jesus Christ, who died on the cross. And his cross and his blood means something. His blood was shed for us. And I pray that we never take for granted what Christ did on the cross, what was done for me. And Daniel realized that. Daniel realized that there is only one God, and there is no you get one chance to share your faith most times. And he realized that. And I pray that we realize that. and make use of every opportunity that we have. That when I come in contact with people, that I don't dumb down my faith, that I don't try and weaken it any way, shape, or form. So I just pray that God give us the courage as we go through each day and come in contact with others, that we just give us a heart for Him, give us a heart for others, that we just, don't go through life as a ship passing in the night. Be aware of others around us, and I encourage you to just look for opportunities to share and to just be true to God. Let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, I thank you for Daniel, and I thank you for his friends, and I pray, Lord, that you just be with us as we go through each week, Lord. I pray that you just give us courage for you, and I pray that, Lord, when we do come to difficult times, that we realize that they're not just by accident, that you give us difficult times to help us to grow and to draw closer to you. I pray that we take advantage of those times. I pray that we look not to our own device when things become tough, but we just lean harder on you and draw closer to you. Help us to realize that this isn't just for nothing, that you've prepared a place for us, and Lord, and that you'll come back to get us one day, be it through death or your resurrection, and that's a hope that we have to hope in, and just thank you for that. And